Grist to the Mill. An Artlink and Poorboy project.
So I'm Jan-Bert Vandenberg, I'm the director of Artlink, and I've been working with the organisation for the last 26 years. Artlink is an arts organisation that works with people who have specific experiences and seeks to find creative responses to their lived experiences. So, for example, we've been working with people with sight impairment and hearing impairment to understand how they experience the arts, how they engage with the arts, and what that feels like, both as audience members as well as producers.
My name's Sandy Thompson. I'm Artistic Director of Poorboy Theatre Company. We've been going since 2002. The company does a range of work. We certainly do scripted work that's performed on a stage, but that tends to only be half the story. We do a lot of work which is promenade, moving from space to space in both public and private spaces. We do work that is typified usually by some kind of really vibrant interaction with the audience. We frequently work under the idea of having a duty of care for our audience. If you're going to ask audience to talk back to you or carry things for you or walk with you or eat things that you give them, then it's important that you treat that with a certain type of respect. And all in all, what it does is it makes for a kind of unique interaction with the audience every time there's a performance.
We felt Poorboy had a really interesting way of thinking about engaging with its audience, its general audience. And I suppose some of that work also resonated with the specific audiences that we were working with, and especially audiences with sight impairment. So it seemed natural to commission Poorboy to explore their particular unique approach a wee bit more, both in relation to a promenade performance that we did last year and then the residency that we've more recently undertaken with Poorboy.
The previous projects that we've done with Artlink were 2 years ago we did a 20-minute segment of Blood and Roses, which was an audio journey that you listen to on headphones, which we did seated for audience with sight impairment with smell pots. And then last year we did The Angels Share, which was a promenade walk with live performance, music and food around a public area in Edinburgh, finishing up in a pub. And that was also for audiences with sight impairment. This year we decided to work on Grist to the Mill in a very particular format with a very particular focus, where we decided that we really needed time to have really integrated research time with the audience, with an audience that had people who were partially sighted and had sight impairment, so that we could get a real back and forth going about the things that we were testing and trying. And to put together the things that we were testing and trying, we brought together a group of people that included members of our performance and writing ensemble and invited guests who were had backgrounds in other fields.
Hi, I'm Ailey and I'm one of the actors. I have worked with Poorboy for many, many years. I am wearing leggings that look like jeans and a t-shirt that says Little Black Dress on it. I'm Elaine, I'm one of the actresses. I am wearing pink and grey trainers, black leggings, a tartan shirt and a black, what they call a fisherman's jumper, so it has lots of little holes all over it, and brown plastic framed glasses that are square.
My name's Jeremiah and I am an actor. I have lived in New York for 3 years and my glasses are the most New York part of me. So slightly hipster and wooden.
My name is Dave. I'm from Ireland, but I live in Amsterdam. I am a musician and a composer and a sound designer. I'm wearing some interesting boots. I'm wearing a pair of shorts that I bought in Amsterdam. Everyone in Amsterdam is 6'5", so the shorts actually come most of the way down my legs. And I'm wearing a musician's black long sleeve top.
Hi, I'm Amy. I'm a product design student from Duncan of Dormiston in Dundee, and I'm here just to study how we can have theatre performance for the blind and partially sighted. I'm originally from the Isle of Man, hence my weird accent, and I've got blonde, middle-length hair, black and white jumper on, navy-ish short ankle-length jeans, and white plimsoll trainers.
My name's Brian Ferguson. I'm an actor. Done a bit of work working with a deaf and hearing ensemble before, so I am used to thinking of how to make theatre and also to make it inclusive and accessible for an audience who don't have all senses available to them.
So we called the project Grist to the Mill, which I realise in retrospect is a very Scottish phrase that not everyone is familiar with. And grist to the mill is stuff that goes into the mill to make the bread. It's all just grist to the mill, means it's all just stuff to work with. And for us, what we hoped was that our experiences would provide some information that other people could take and use in their own practice as they began to make work potentially for these kind of audiences.
The questions that Poorboy set out to answer were as follows. Number 1, experiment with audio description as an integral part of live performance and its dialogue. Or, can we make text rich enough that it negates the need for audio description without it becoming cumbersome? Number 2, explore the inclusion of taste or food as an integral part of the performance experience. Number 3, to play with the marrying of words and music to create an evocative world. Number 4, to seek those physical conditions where voice and sound are at their most effective within different spaces. Number 5, to interrogate the use of silence as a complement to atmospheric sounds, dialogue, and music. Or what textures can we use that are not audio textures? Number 6, is the specificity of audio description something that inhibits each individual audience member's imagination? Are there more open-ended ways to communicate a setting or a character which leaves more space for individual interpretation? Number 7, as a company that works well with words, can we create an emotive, effective, sustained section of narrative and action that doesn't use them? Number 8, explore the interactive aspects of audience-focused performance. Or how do we create participative sections of performance for those without sight? Number 9, to create an immersive environment with individually discernible narrative strands, or making the entire world of a play around an audience, with varied sound, music, and sensation. Number 10, can existing technology and digital facilities which are not considered primarily assistive in purpose be repurposed to enhance the performance experience?
This is 2 weeks for us to try things that possibly don't work. So for us, one of the things is that as theatre makers, we're always interested when we're given a set of conditions. So there is perhaps a certain type of thinking that happens when you say to someone in a creative company, we want to talk about access, and they think about it like the wrong kind of restriction. Whereas if you say to a theatre maker, imagine that you're making a piece of theatre and some people in the audience can see it and some can't, that is immediately exciting because you're like, oh, what could I do with that?
Poorboy spent 2 weeks experimenting with making work and then showcasing it for audiences that were blind and partially sighted, as well as some invited guests. Some of this work was developed around text adapted from a book, while some was existing scenes from well-known plays. Working with the audience allowed the company to take the feedback given and let it inform how the rest of the research was carried out. One thing they discovered straight away was that some of their original questions maybe weren't the best questions. These are their top 10 findings. Bits and pieces taken from the 2 weeks, curated here into relevant topics.
And this is us into the space. I'm going to take you right in the middle of the space.
Number 1, practical practice. The way in which the company prepared for each showing greatly informed the outcome of the overall experience. Because the company is made up of devising actors and a devising director and playwright, there was no pressure to go into the research as established experts in access. Instead, they researched as experts in theatrical experimentation. Before each deviser entered the rehearsal space, they closed their eyes and were guided into the space by an audio describer. This was helpful in understanding what types of information a person who is partially sighted or blind needs when they enter a new room.
Let's say, so it's an audience of people who can all see. So there is a complicity that has to go on where you go, we know that this is just a room with stuff and people. We're relying on you to pretend that it is what we're making it in front of you. On top of that, if I have someone who cannot see what we're making, then they're relying on an audio description to tell them what it is that they're expected to be complicit in pretending is there.
One of the disciplines that we're doing is that we're working with what's available and what's workable, the same way that you would if you were doing any kind of piece of work. You might have this in your head and it might be this size and it might need all this stuff. In reality, you have the budget you have, the space is the real space, the people are the real people, and you do what you can where you are with what you have. And that's what we're doing today. And out of that, we've gotten some really lovely stuff the way that everybody always does, because restrictions are interesting and mean that you have to make a decision about what you're doing. What I did was I chopped up the text so that it felt like it had some kind of poetry and rhythm to it, so that I felt that it was easier to listen to. And then I brought that in today, and we got that up on its feet to begin to see, to begin to hear what it is that did. And while everyone was doing that, I didn't watch. I sat with my back to the action and just listened. And today has been about getting something evocative, but also something that has clarity.
Each day, a new research topic was scheduled for the group to experiment with. Different members of the company did individual research and then led in particular topics. Quickly, it became clear that not all topics were created equal, and some needed much more time to dissect to be able to find more interesting discoveries.
A massive advantage to us of having you in the room is that we are really just extending our imagination into whether something works or not, and now we have a chance to ask you if it does. What we're going to do is each day when we do a show, and we're going to try and take the things that we've been told and we're going to try and put them into practice, and we'll try it again in a different way the next day if we can.
The second finding from Poorboy was that audiences who are blind and partially sighted can differ in their access needs, and all audience members have specific artistic preferences.
One of the things that's been fascinating is getting an insight into, like we'll have an Amy in the room in particular, of just like the things that theatre thinks is normal, like when you're working in a room or when you're working as a performer, like there's a bunch of stuff that we just, like wearing black. When the guy was like, you're all in black, it's really unhelpful, can you all wear different colours? It was really fascinating learning some of the things that were our assumptions of things. And I think that with the audio description, there are things that we knew that we were doing only because of restrictions in the number of people in the room. But we never explained to the audience that that's why that was happening.
As you map a user experience, you kind of need to consider that every user is different, all their taste is different, their personality is different, and you kind of have to cater for that. So it was just really important to know like how a person would like react to the performance and things.
Like any audience, every member of the audience has a different degree of confidence in their own interpretation of things. So we had somebody in the audience today who's been at a different project that we did, who's just very bold. He's completely blind, he can't see anything at all. But he is just very confident with his ability to interpret what's going on, and he's not worried if he loses the thread and he picks it back up again. You have other people who are very precise in their nature and would like things done in a way that means that they're never going to miss anything, and who are uncomfortable that they might have missed something that's important, and that's true of any audience. So one of the things is that blind audiences are just the same as other audiences. Like there's not a single way of doing it that works for everybody.
From someone today was, that I said, how did you find the sensory elements, the smells and the different, the touch of the scarf and things? And they went, yeah, they were really good, but just there wasn't very much of it. They went, if you're going to have a sensory experience, let's go for it. Yeah. And that's maybe quite a brave audience member, but I thought that was quite cool as well to hear bring it on, I think sometimes you can get really excited about a space and an opportunity for something sensory, but then ultimately, it's like we had the food out on the table because we were having dinner, and I was like, yeah, this is a great spot, and she's talking about eating food, and this will work really well, and so I was quite excited. How'd you find that? And they're like, yeah, it smelled like food. What was I supposed to get from it? I'm like, oh, it's just not that great an idea, is it? It's actually just a bit of a boring idea, and you really have to put your creativity into these ideas as well. They can't just be a fill-in-the-gap sensory item.
Making work for audiences who are blind or who cannot see is not the same as making work for an audience who have some people who are blind, some people who are partially sighted, and some people who can see. So you have to be very specific, first of all, about going, who's eating this? Do you know, you have to start by going, who's it for? Who's eating it? It's in the nature of all art that you put in strong tastes. And you just get that thing of going, do you know what? Some people don't like kale. Some people just don't like it. It doesn't matter what you put in it, they don't like it. And it doesn't matter how beautifully you do it or how much you'll be like, is there kale in this? Do you know what I mean? And it's like, so as you're taking things down, you make big choices like that all the time.
The third finding from Poorboy was that some things need to happen one thing at a time. This was a process that was under constant scrutiny throughout the week. The way that information was distilled, packaged, and delivered to the audience through theatrical conventions. Some of this was through experimentation with audio description, additional soundscape, and music.
It's about having a colour palette of 16 colours rather than 25,000.
And what I'm learning when we do this stuff is like when you were saying that layering things don't work. He gives my nephew paints and he goes, yellow and green and blue, everything's brown. Everything ends up brown because he uses every colour, so everything ends up brown because that's what happens when you mix all the paints together. So we're trying we're trying to separate things out so that everything doesn't end up orally brown, is where I'm going with this.
Whether you're doing surrealism or whether you're doing linear thought line, it just has to be done with this different level of clarity. In the way that, and especially from the audio sense, the level of clarity and when people are walking or where they're saying it from, or just that whole, directorially, it has to be viewed differently.
There's only a certain amount of sensory bandwidth available. So if you're asking people to eat, then their brains are largely taken up with the eating, and you need to not have important dialogue at the same time, or you need to have, you know what I mean? Like you have to empty out other things to free up bandwidth.
And that is a time thing about making the choice to put that into your rehearsal period.
Yeah. Which makes it a money thing. The minute it's a time thing, makes it a money thing. You need the money to be able to pay everybody for it to take another week at least, because you're doing almost like a level of simultaneous translation that needs to get done at the same time. And it is entirely it's much more effective, I think, if it's done as part of the process, rather what the things we're working with, they have to be in the room. They all have to be in the room at the same time. It's not something you can graft on at the end.
Number 4 is sound. This was a huge part of the research, as the majority of the experience for an audience that is blind or partially sighted comes from what they hear in the piece. This topic encompassed the physical performance space, the way music was used, as well as live and recorded soundscape. While there are many elements of sound technology that could be used in live event, Poorboy used what they had in the room for this project. One microphone, a piano, and the company.
So today we have the same story, and we're doing it twice with the emphasis on different things. This week we're looking at sound, use of sound, the use of space and arrangement, and the use of silence. What we're bringing from last week is we're also looking at audio description, because that turns out to be a life study, and I was a little bit flippant to think I could deal with it in 4 days.
As a musician and a person who works in the world of sound, I have a heightened awareness of what sound does and what it can achieve and what it can do to make an experience brighter or better or more interesting, because particularly with music you can conjure up a place, a time, an emotional landscape in 30 seconds. You don't have to describe it, you know it, you can feel, oh, we're there, it's that place with that kind of music. However, it's incredibly difficult to manage sound in the real world, because theatre happens in an open space, or in this case in a big bright reverb hall, and that's where we are. So even if we say we're down a mine, if I was doing a movie I could make it sound like we were down a mine, but in here I can't. I can only make it sound like we're in a church hall. So that relies on another way of getting people to imagine that we're in a mine, so we can bring other sounds in to do that, to help that experience.
What I found was that without using as much audio description, how important it was to tell the story using sound, not only the words. So it was about finding a balance, the correct balance between your actions and your movements versus the sound, so that the story could be told through both means.
If you're working with a piece that's text driven,
Yeah.
then obviously the sound has to, the text world, the spoken word, is part of the sound world.
Yes, yes.
And in this room,
Yeah.
the sound world also includes the room and moving about.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff are, whether you like it or not, part of the score of the piece. So if someone moves or drops something or whatever, and if I speak in this acoustic, that's part of it.
Yeah.
One thing that we did do, which was interesting and probably not noticeable, was the fact that we really, in an audio sense, went through every beat of that and made it really clean. So there was really specific moments where action was happening or not happening, depending on what sound or dialogue had to be clear. So the way a door would open, or where a line was said from in one location and not another one, was really intentionally spelled out, which would have made it much easier for an audience that was blind to understand, but a sighted audience wouldn't have necessarily noticed that that was anything different, but it was a part of the process that took a bit of time to go through. Yeah.
What we're going to try and do is use this very, very soupy and rich music as a character to improvise along with. We're just going to hit the go button and do the piece as we've rehearsed it up until now, and see what that does to us and also what it does to the world that we're creating in people's imaginations. High frequency and low frequency, and what I discovered is that high frequencies are, this is a standard audio thing, high frequencies are directional, so that if I make a high frequency sound, it's much easier to tell where it is. If I make a low frequency sound, it doesn't matter where it is. So what this means is, men, you can hear men. If a woman turns up stage, you can't hear her. And that has a whole kind of influence about, okay, so if you pitch your voice up high, then suddenly you disappear when you turn around. If you don't, you don't. What I'm learning about this is that the most important thing is the acoustic space that we work in has a huge impact on how you perceive sound in relation to you. So that as I'm talking to you, my voice is bouncing off walls that are 50 and 100 feet away from me and back to your ears, which we wouldn't necessarily have chosen to do, but there you are.
Fifth is space and placement. This includes the physical performance space and also the theatrical space, or the world the performance is creating. Placement is about when and how best to present those spaces and their definitions to an audience. Also, how the audience is situated within a space and how immersive theatre can really be advantageous.
The thing that we noticed a lot was
in a similar sense, the preamble that people get to the piece is really essential. So the first day we did a scene, but we didn't really set it up, we just let it happen. And people felt a bit disconnected from it, and then the next day we went through a thing which, what Sandy said she felt was too long dramatically as setup, but everyone else said it was necessary. Now it's not necessarily something you would do in the play, but it's about when that information is passed over that allows someone to feel confident and comfortable with the surrounding that they're in. I think that's something we can maybe explore a bit more and in different ways, whether that's through touch or through just storytelling.
Like people sometimes go a different day to the theatre to get a touch tour of the costumes or the set, so that they already have all that in their head, so that when they then go to see the play, what they then are only really getting in the preamble is a description of, say, the actors or the character or something like that, so that they are then ready to get the play. So it's, you know, things are spread out. It's a longer time commitment to do stuff.
Because it's a church, it slows things down. It's designed for singing and it's designed for preaching, and so it's about big, long, you can say a long word and it will last in the air for a long time. Is this a difficult space to listen to theatre in?
It's unusual, but we're that used to listening that, you know, you're in one shop, you're in another shop, you're in a pub, you're in whatever, and you're that used to listening that, you know, you kind of forget what's round about you.
So it is what it is, basically. Right. Okay. That's fine.
It feels like we started the week, and certainly in my head, I was like, we should move as little as possible on stage. We should almost be standing still and doing this like a radio play. And actually, that was much, much less interesting to them than the piece we did, where they felt like they were right in the thick of the scene, and we were grappling and moving around, and that was all very exciting to them.
I don't want to just give an experience that is all through your ears. So the things that I found that worked really well, that were seemed to be the most successful with the audience, were how do you get the audience immersed in that show.
That's what we were saying.
Yeah, so times where we did the show in the round, or kind of like this, I think Fiona had mentioned that it was nice to sit at the table with the actors and kind of have that unique experience. Well, ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is give someone a unique experience anytime they come to the theatre. So I think that would be the way I would continue to work in this way, is find, and what we did last year is, with the site-specific version, is find ways to make people feel a part of it in a way that you're not if you're watching TV or if you're listening to the radio. And that was actually really fun to play with as well.
Number 6. Audio description and narration. This was the topic that grew arms and legs, as Poorboy found that creative alternatives were not always welcome or useful, and that certain types of audio description fit certain types of plays.
Can I ask about your experiences of audio description? Does it arrive in head? You know, I know it's done lots of different ways, so I'd be quite interested in that kind of, that type of audio description you're talking about that sits way, way, way at the back. Is that something that you're listening to just in one ear? Or?
Usually, aye.
Yes.
But I usually have it kind of behind my ear,
right,
so that you're hearing the play. But there's only ever audio description when there's no dialogue. So you're not getting audio description when there's dialogue, and lesser is better. You know, you're not wanting too much information.
So
I don't know if it helps, but Pat and I just don't go to the theatre now unless it's audio described. It's got to that stage where, okay, you might only get 60% of the play, even with audio description. But without audio description, you might only get 25% of the play. You might get 40%. Audio description doesn't give you the 100% of the play. It never will.
And I suppose one of the things we're interested in is that if it can never be exactly the same experience as the people who are sitting and watching the play with their eyes, listening with their ears, is is there a way where audio description can give you 100% of something else?
What happens when you get audio description is that about 10 minutes before the performance starts, the person who's doing the audio description and has obviously seen the piece many times has prepared notes which basically outline the the basics of the some basics of the plot, the setting, the costumes, the characters, and so forth. Really, as you were saying, less is more, but I mean, one of the things which affects audio description of live performance when there is an audio describer in a box somewhere doing the audio description is, of course, they've got no control over the performance is different every single night, and they're not in control of that, so they're trying their best to fit in as much of the relevant information as they can. But it's a very fine line between too much and too whatever. And some of the audio describers will go so far as to say, well, Adrian's in, she likes to know about this stuff, and that other one's in, and they like to know about the dancing.
So you get a kind of tailored
the other one,
to you, maybe.
and the other one likes to know all about the weapons and the stabbing.
We talked a little about the difference between making something accessible and making it inclusive, because making something accessible can actually make it less inclusive, so that if you're receiving information in an earpiece that everyone else isn't, then you're not as involved in the performance as people who aren't.
I'm working on the premise that I'm using as little formal audio description in the scene as possible. So I'm aiming to make evocative stage text in whatever way that kind of makes a narrative rather than discrete audio description.
Get your stuff and get out of here.
I walked to the bedroom.
I grab her arm. Where are you going?
I think I have to get out of here, Eddie.
No, you ain't going nowhere. He's the one.
I think I can't stay here no more.
She frees her arm. She comes back towards me.
I'm sorry, Eddie.
She's begging.
Oh, Eddie, don't be like that.
You ain't going nowheres.
Eddie, I'm not a baby anymore.
I reach out for her, I grab her, I draw her towards me, and I kiss her on the mouth.
I tried to get free.
Hey, don't! I'm pulling on Eddie's arm. Stop that!
So I suppose the way we're interested in looking at audio description is something that becomes part of the piece that the whole audience hears, rather than just certain members of the audience hearing in a separate earpiece.
It was a bit difficult to catch, particularly at first, which was the audio description and which was the dialogue.
I think it worked much better, the actors being who they were than being audio describers at the same time. I think it worked, you were much more involved, so were they, and there was enough audio description at the beginning to sort of set the scene. And
what I thought was interesting, I have to say, as a writer, is that preamble that I kind of read felt like an inordinate amount of chat to do before you started to do something. You know, like it felt like, you look at it on the page and you're like, that's half a page of text, and as a writer I'm used to like trying to squash that as small as possible. Anything that's not the play, make it as small as possible.
It depends to a certain extent on the script that you're using, how the script might dictate the type of audio description that you need.
Yes.
The challenge of it, I suppose, would be the difference between, in a way, what people say that they want in the feedback sessions, and actually some of the time the feedback you're getting is just what people are used to, and they're kind of saying, but this isn't how I normally do it, and they present that as a problem.
Number 7 is pacing. It's all happening faster than you think. How much an audience takes in depends on what they're hearing and when they're hearing it and whether or not they've tuned in yet. This is true of all theatre. Here is just more so.
And one thing that we discovered with audio description when it was done by the actors on stage is that there's much more of a sense of pace of the scene and of the piece. So any stage directions that are described are worked into the pace of the scene and the storytelling, which seems really different to a lot of the audio description we had heard. which didn't work like that.
If you're going to talk and do something, separate them out a little bit so that people go, oh, I can hear the noise of the cups, now I can hear you coming back into the room, but try not to multitask too much, because actually it's just really noisy and distracting.
The pace I thought was a lot better of it, because I think maybe because we're starting at the beginning and it was giving us time to work out where we were and what was going on, whereas with the first piece, because like we said before, the action was so manic and I was then trying to squeeze a lot of information in something that was very fast moving anyway. So I think you got the pace right with this and inserting it certainly at the top, you know, and it said right away, oh, we're in a shop. And I immediately, because you'd said about, the acoustics, you might not think, but I immediately stopped thinking about the acoustics of this place and thought, I'm in a shop. And immediately started thinking about a shop.
If you were sitting in a train looking out the window, so the things that are in the distance, you have enough time to take those in. The things that are right beside the train, gone. And the things that, so that in the timeline of the piece, that there are things that if you want it to be cold or whatever, then you can do that over a longer time period than specific, here's a thing that we want you to see right now at this time, because it's not going to come back again.
Number 8 is product design. Designer Amy Lowe spent her time developing new methods of creating immersive experiences for audiences. She made plaster casts of 2 actors' faces and presented them to an audience member before the showing. The casts were accompanied by a recording of the actors giving a description of the characters that they would soon be playing. On top of this, Poorboy also experimented with food and the way that could be presented to an audience.
When you can't see, you need something, whether it's the coming into the building and how that's handled, whether that's a description of the space, or whether that's a description of the actors, or whether that's a description of how the set is set up, or all of them. But actually, it's difficult to just visualise characters doing anything if you don't have some kind of orientation beforehand.
As designers, it's mostly important to gain empathy of what it's like to be a blind person. Effectively, you have to try and put yourselves in the person's shoes. So as they were rehearsing, I kind of would watch with my eyes shut and kind of get a feel of how you use sound to locate different people. And this kind of led to me mapping the user's experience, and what I mean by this is you kind of take the steps of what the user goes through and what they register and things like that. So even just coming into the building, Ailey already described it for me, and it was so, I've never ever had that done before, and it was like quite interesting to see how much you rely on that to get an image. For me, it was good to focus on how to enhance the relationship between the audience and the characters themselves, because you're relying on the audio description. So that's why I kind of made these faces and put Ailey and Jeremiah through a bit of an uncomfortable situation. When they were using it, they actually, Fiona actually didn't want the headphones because she's got a hearing issue, so she finds it quite difficult. Apparently that's quite common. But I talked her through it myself, and she really engaged with it, and she was like, just loving how she could actually feel someone's form, I think, and like picture that in her head. And as I was saying the character, she was like, okay. And then I think you spoke to her afterwards, did you? After the play?
Her response afterwards was that she was able to get a picture of that person, especially because you used the character name when you described the face, so that when that name came up on stage, she immediately had a recognition of, oh yeah, that was that figure, that was that face, and she said it gave her a much better idea of who the character was.
Yeah, I feel like if it would have been useful to have made quite a few, and maybe have let them keep it during the performance, so that they could keep recognising who the person was, and maybe that would contribute to their feel of the actual performance as well.
Bandwidth is about how much you've got left to be able to get new information in as someone's coming in. Like when my eyes are shut, you know, once there was music and feet and you're like, that's it, my band, that's full. I'd like all like what you can deal with. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, is like it would have to be so intuitive.
It does have to blend in.
Or,
rather
yes,
than
so
be
much
like
a part of
an
what's
add-on.
happening.
It has to be incorporated, otherwise, if it's just an additional thing, then you're like kind of faffing with that whilst you're also trying to pay attention to the performance. And then it just becomes an obstacle rather than an addition to an improvement.
So we wrote in a bit that was about a fireworks display. And Jeremiah had stuffed these raspberries with Philadelphia cheese and then stuck to the top of that with some Pop Rocks. So that you had, and the response to that largely was very positive, because it was kind of so unexpected, and it was unexpected, I realised, for everyone. It's a really unusual thing to have, and it was very appropriate for the fireworks that we were talking about. You know, it sounds like fireworks in your head, in your mouth. But I think the other thing was that it was happening as a surprise to absolutely everyone. And that's just a different proposition. I was impressed by the fact that actually, no matter how experienced or not, or traditional for theatre or not people were, that by and large people responded better if it was a layer of, you know, if it was subtext, or if the sensory thing was subtext, or if the sensory thing was, just doing something that wasn't mechanical. You know, it wasn't, here's the paper tearing, somebody said the paper's tearing. Yeah. Because that, actually, you're like, yeah, I've got that, I don't need that.
The whole experience has been really, really good for me, I feel, as a designer, as I've just learned how, like, a different discipline does things, and how it's actually really similar to the way we do things. So Sandy was saying that when she makes a production, she maps out how it's all going to go in the story, and that's what we do. We all just need the finer details to form something that we actually think will satisfy the user's needs. So it's been an amazing experience.
Number 9 looks at the difference between using new work versus existing text. Poorboy regularly treats all text like new pieces of work. In this instance, they use scenes from Arthur Miller's A View from the Bridge, as well as creating new script adapted from the book The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox by Maggie O'Farrell. Both presented unique challenges and rewards.
If you're not making big decisions, then bleh doesn't read. No. Like middling doesn't read. So stylistically, in terms of the actor, even the difference in that conversation that was happening at the start of the piece, there was just the character choices had to be bolder. All of that has to be. If it's going to land, you have to give it enough to let it land. I think we all felt that the thing that we were more in control of, the one that we were writing, we were adapting from a book, was an awful lot easier to find it in and out of. And Arthur Miller, frankly, drove me round the twist with how difficult he was to weave anything in and out.
Whatever it is that we try to do has to come from the play. Again, it comes from this thing of one of the main realisations being that, okay, they're blind, but much, much more than that, they are people who want to go to theatre and be swept and moved by it. And so that actually, like the ramp analogy that Dave uses, yeah, great, there's a ramp there so we can go into the building, but if there's ramps in all the buildings, what building do we actually want to go into, you know? So it feels really important that whatever extra thing we are working on has to be true to the piece of work that we are making it with. So, for example, with the Arthur Miller piece, we've almost come back to a traditional audio description style where one voice reads the audio description while the characters play the scene. And actually, just by making tiny little changes that just fit with that play.
And finally, number 10. As an artist, you already have the impulse to empathize. In this work, it's just an extension of that. The artist's desire to explore and communicate are still by far the most useful tools in the tool belt.
Bottom line is that you understand what's going on, because you can never make us sighted. You can never make us have the same experience of what's going on as a sighted person would have. And it's so long since I could see that I probably would get confused if we did try. and it doesn't, I mean, our lives aren't like that, so why should we want theatre to be like that? It is all about comprehension.
And actually the thing that's very, very effective is to work really well as an artist and just bear in mind that some of your audience can't see. So it's about making a piece of work that uses as much creativity as you can throw at it, but is mindful of the fact that that creativity has to be appropriate to someone that can't see.
They just engage with really good dramatic theatre. You know, like they loved the second time we did the Arthur Miller piece because they were right there next to it, and it was really close, and it was a really heightened scene done in a way where the actors just got to be the actors and just do a scene really well. Anyone loves to see that.
The fact that people can't see what we're doing isn't the biggest issue. It's much more about the way in which the work engages them as people.
I suppose to give, I suppose not to come into something feet first and go, right, we've got 2 weeks, we're going to solve this, when actually some very clever people have been thinking about this a lot for a very long time, is helpful to keep in mind.
Because we only had to do little scenes and little bits of performance and little bits of theatre, most of our time was taken up thinking like an audience. Now, as a director, I'm used to sitting at one end of the room frantically trying to be someone that doesn't know what's going on, even though I'm probably been involved for weeks on end. And I, as both a writer and director, I think the amount of things that we've learned that's just about how valuable it is to take time to be able to ask people stuff. And sometimes people have an opinion, sometimes they don't, and that's fine, you know, but it's something that our job is all about extending our imaginations, and it's just been an absolute delight to be able to extend our imagination in this direction and then have people tell us if we got it totally wrong or not, because if you don't ask, you'll never know. So I'd like to thank everybody that's been, I think everyone's been a participant, being our audience has very much been bring all of yourself and all of your opinions and expect us to ask you lots of things, and the chat has always been fantastic, so thank you very, very much for coming.
So one thing that we aim and hope to achieve is to make sure that the experience of the individual, the experience of the lived experience of the individual, say again with hearing impairment or sight impairment, is central at the development process and the creative process. And what that does is create a whole range, or should do, is create a whole range of new possibilities. And it is that potential that we're after, and I think very much succeed in creating. Because what we are ultimately interested in is art, not necessarily that interested in people's specific impairments. What we're interested in is them as individuals and their experiences, and going on a journey with them. Some people are much more open to that than others. And that actually what you get is a reflection of the wider population, where some people are very excited about engaging with art in quite an experimental way, and other people are very excited about engaging and receiving a more traditional form of art, both of which are really important and both of which are really valuable. I love the work, and I really believe that there's still a huge amount of potential in the work that we do, and actually that potential is the greater the more that the people we work with are involved in creating the artistic products. To me, that feels exciting. That feels full of possibilities, and sounds like art.
Artlink and Poorboy would like to thank everyone who made Grist to the Mill possible.